Why is this culture so effective?
Very interesting. Okay, so it's evolved a lot of new tactics that have never been tried before. So, in our book, The Pragmatist Guide to Crafting Religion, what we essentially do is we argue that humanity can be thought of as sort of an evolving firmware, which is like our biology, our genes. But on top of that firmware, there's evolving sets of software. And this software, today we often talk about memes as like things that infect somebody and then cause them to just turn around and infect other people. But historically, most memetic clusters actually augmented a person's sort of biological fitness, the number of surviving offspring they had, and that's how they survived. That's how, I mean, if you look at things with a secular mindset, why things like Islam and Judaism figured out stuff like hand washing literally centuries before science figured out hand washing. And you see this across these traditions. For example, if you look at all of the old traditions, almost all of them have some arbitrary self-denial holiday, like Lent or Ramadan or Feast of the Firstborn or whatever, right? And just now, after throwing out all of those rituals over the past, 50, 100 years, secular society's like, oh, now we got to have our juice cleanses. Now we got to have our, they're realizing of fasting and stuff like that, right? It has positive mental effects. And so I think that if you see these as different, like evolving cultural groups, this super virus evolved some very unique tactics, and it is not the same thing as the historic progressive movement. What it is something, so the reason I call it a super virus is it is very much so, when you talk about a super bacteria or a super bug, they typically come up in things like hospitals, where you have a ton of people with a weakened immune system, all in a similar environment with lots of sort of viruses or bacteria that can intermingle alongside antibiotics and stuff like that. This is what was created by the internet. This is why all of this stuff started when social media happened. Essentially, you had a super spreader environment where new mimetic ideas were able to test themselves against all of the world's traditions at the same time, optimize and react very quickly, and become incredibly virulent while evolving strategies that had never been tried before. So one of the most effective strategies that it uses is, if you look historically, if you look at cultural groups as sort of like nodal clouds that sort of overlap with each other, when you had a corrupted node within a nodal cloud, or a node that looked like it was flipping, what you would do if you were a majority Protestant country or majority Catholic country, like a Catholic came in and started preaching, or a Protestant came in and started preaching, you'd burn them. You'd burn them at the stake often, right? Or if somebody just had like random cultural mutation, in the same way you have like random genetic mutation, and they believe something weird, like they were a witch, and you burn them, right? That's how you maintained this level of cultural fidelity. What the virus does, which is very interesting, is it organically determines when a node looks like it might be flipping, and then it essentially shadow bans the node. It begins to deconnect that node's links to all of the rest of the network's power structures. And this is really powerful, because what it means is the other nodes that might be allied with that node, they don't react the way they would have historically when somebody was being like burned at the stake or something like that, which is actually why cancellation is a fairly ineffective tactic and genuinely not used that much when contrasted with just a shadow banning process of the person just doesn't get a promotion if it looks like they might be immune to these ideas. They just don't, their papers get published a little less. Certain platforms begin to favor them less within the algorithm. And that's how it has been able to maintain such control, I think, of the upper echelons of our society.
But it's not like every organization is run by a progressive movement, right? There are organizations out there that seem to be a lot more open to new ideas. We're seeing pushback from a variety of places. The opportunity for people to have independent jobs.
So I would say that it's not every organization. So it specifically targets the organizations it can best use to maintain its population levels. And so those are typically organizations that are involved in education. So you're looking at the middle school system, the high school system, and the college system are the organizations that it is most critical that it maintains an absolute stranglehold over. And this again comes to fertility issues. Of the populations of the world, if there is one population that has a very low birth rate, it is this population, this urban monoculture. Because of that, the only way it can repopulate its ideological faction is through siphoning children from other, often more conservative cultural traditions, or in other ways, deviant cultural traditions that are, for whatever reason, having a lot of kids.